Welcome to Shadow Psychology Coded, where we dare to explore the most dangerous and suppressed corners of human psychology. Today we begin a journey into territories of Nietzsche's philosophy that have been deliberately hidden from public view for centuries. Fragments so explosive that publishers feared to print them, scholars avoided analyzing them, and the mainstream philosophical establishment systematically suppressed them. What you're about to discover will challenge everything you think you know about Nietzsche's views on women, relationships, and human nature. These aren't the sanitized academic interpretations you find in universities. These are raw, unfiltered insights from Nietzsche's most private correspondence and unpublished notes, revelations that reveal a depth of understanding about feminine psychology that would make modern gender theorists shudder. We begin with perhaps the most controversial aspect. Nietzsche's personal letters to Lou Salome, his sister Elizabeth, and his closest friends contain observations about women that were considered too dangerous for public consumption. Why were these thoughts suppressed? Because they reveal truths about human nature that contradict modern narratives about gender equality and feminine virtue. Because they expose psychological dynamics that society would prefer to keep buried. Because they give men weapons of perception that could make them immune to certain forms of manipulation. In this exploration, we must first understand the context. Nietzsche wasn't writing these observations as philosophical treatises for publication. They were private reflections, raw and uncensored, written in moments of intense personal experience and emotional turmoil. This makes them more valuable, not less, because they represent his genuine, unfiltered perceptions rather than carefully constructed arguments designed for public consumption. The first and most shocking revelation comes from his letters to Lou Salome, the woman who arguably understood him better than anyone else, and who broke his heart more completely than any other. In these letters, we find Nietzsche oscillating between worship and warning, between adoration and analysis. He writes not just as a lover, but as a psychologist studying a fascinating and dangerous specimen. What makes these observations so valuable is that they come from a place of intimate experience rather than abstract theorizing. Nietzsche wasn't a celibate academic speculating about women from a safe distance. He was a man who had loved, desired, been rejected, and been destroyed by women. His insights are forged in the fires of personal tragedy and psychological devastation. This gives them an authenticity that theoretical gender studies completely lack. The suppressed fragments reveal several key patterns that modern philosophy has tried to erase. First, Nietzsche's concept of the eternal feminine isn't the romantic ideal that Goethe envisioned. It's a dangerous psychological force that most men are completely unprepared to handle. In his letters to Paul Ray, he describes watching how women manipulate social situations, how they use male desire as a weapon, how they navigate power dynamics with an instinctive genius that most men cannot comprehend. These observations weren't misogynistic, they were clinical, detached, analytical, the observations of a master psychologist studying a fascinating psychological phenomenon. Second, his correspondence reveals a terrifying understanding of how female nature operates in conditions of modernity. He saw how urbanization and social liberation were creating new types of feminine psychology, how the traditional virtues of femininity were transforming into new forms of power and manipulation. He predicted with uncanny accuracy how sexual liberation would lead not to freedom, but to new forms of psychological warfare between men and women. Third, and most dangerously, his private writings contain detailed analyses of how weak men become slaves to feminine approval, how the thirst for female validation drives men to betray their own potential, how the entire structure of civilized society is built around men's desperate need for female attention. This isn't the angry ranting of a bitter misogynist. It's the cold clinical analysis of a philosopher who understood the deepest drivers of human psychology. The reason these fragments remain suppressed is obvious. They give men psychological weapons that could make them immune to social manipulation. They reveal the hidden mechanisms of social control that keep men compliant and domesticated. They expose the psychological games that people play unconsciously, giving those who understand them an unfair advantage in the battle of the sexes. But beyond the psychological insights, these letters reveal something even more profound: Nietzsche's personal struggle with his own attraction to dangerous women, his recognition that his philosophical genius was both amplified and threatened by his relationships with intellectually formidable women, his understanding that great men are often destroyed by their taste for dangerous feminine company. This isn't ancient history. It's a warning that remains relevant today. The modern world has created conditions where Nietzsche's observations are more true than ever. Social media has amplified feminine psychological power exponentially. Dating apps have turned relationships into markets where certain psychological traits are rewarded and others are punished. The collapse of traditional structures has created a psychological Wild West where Nietzsche's warnings become essential survival guides. But this isn't just about survival, it's about understanding. Nietzsche's forbidden insights give us a framework for understanding modern gender dynamics that no amount of gender studies can provide. They help us see through the surface-level narratives to the psychological realities beneath. They provide the conceptual tools to navigate a world where traditional rules have collapsed, but human nature remains unchanged. As we proceed through these forbidden fragments, remember that we're not engaging in misogyny or bitterness. We're engaging in clear-eyed psychological analysis. The goal isn't to condemn or praise, but to understand. The goal is to see reality as it is, not as we wish it to be. The goal is to develop the psychological sophistication to navigate complex human relationships without being destroyed by them. This is the true value of Nietzsche's forbidden wisdom. It doesn't tell us what to think, but how to see. It doesn't give us answers, but better questions. It doesn't provide comfort, but power, the power that comes from seeing reality without illusions. In the next section, we'll dive into the specific letters and fragments that the philosophical establishment doesn't want you to see. We'll examine exactly what Nietzsche wrote to Lou Salome about feminine psychology, what he told his friends about his observations of male-female dynamics, and how these private reflections contradict the sanitized version of Nietzsche presented in academia. This is just the beginning of our journey into Nietzsche's most dangerous ideas, the ideas that could change how you see every relationship in your life. If the private letters were the raw, bleeding nerve of Nietzsche's experience, then "Thus Spoke Zarathustra" is the sublime, terrifying, and poetic crystallization of that experience into high philosophy. Here, Nietzsche is no longer just Friedrich, the heartbroken man. He is Zarathustra, the prophet, the teacher, the one who has descended and ascended, and his pronouncements on woman are not observations but oracles. They are delivered not with the bitterness of a jilted lover, but with the terrifying clarity of a star gazing into an abyss. To misunderstand this section is to misunderstand everything. To reduce it to mere misogyny is to prove oneself a dwarf of spirit, incapable of bearing the weight of mountains. We are not here to agree or disagree. We are here to comprehend a vision of psychological archetypes so potent it can shatter a modern mind unprepared for its voltage. Zarathustra's most famous and most deliberately misunderstood declaration is this: "Are you visiting a woman? Do not forget the whip." This single line has been used to caricature Nietzsche for over a century, to paint him as a brute, a tyrant, a woman-hater. But this is the interpretation of the lazy, the cowardly, those who read with their politics and not with their souls. To understand the whip is to understand the entire dynamic. Zarathustra does not say this to the woman, he says it to the man. It is a warning to the man about his own soul, a mnemonic device for a specific psychological state. The whip is not an instrument for beating women. It is the symbol of the will to power, of self-mastery, of unbreakable purpose. The warning is, when you approach the feminine in its most potent, enchanting, and dangerous form, do not forget your own sovereignty. Do not dissolve. Do not surrender your project, your destiny, your hardness. The feminine, in its deepest essence as Nietzsche presents it, is a force that tests a man's sovereignty. It is the ultimate test. A weak man, a modern man, a man of the herd, will be consumed by it, will become a slave to the approval, the body, the psychology of woman. He will lay down his whip, his will, and become domesticated, comfortable, and mediocre. The strong man, the Übermenschen becoming, approaches with the whip in hand, not to threaten her, but to remind himself of his own unyielding nature. The encounter then becomes a dance, a perilous game between two sovereign powers, not a merger of two weaknesses. This leads us to the core archetype, woman as a danger and a play. Nietzsche is not speaking of woman as a literal child, but as a manifestation of a nature that is profound in its playfulness, terrible in its simplicity, and ruthless in its goals. He writes, "In a real man, a child is hidden. It wants to play. Come, women, discover the child in man." This is not an insult. It is a diagnosis of staggering insight. Man's highest creative drive, his will to power at its most sublime, is a form of play, the building of castles, the creation of philosophies, the conquest of worlds. But this playful creative drive in man is naive, it is vulnerable, it can be easily distracted, seduced, and misdirected. The woman, in her role as the eternal feminine, understands this child better than the man himself. She becomes the dangerous play that either sharpens his creative will or breaks it entirely. She can channel his playful energy toward the creation of life, of a future, of a lineage, or she can divert it into the petty dramas of domesticity, the pursuit of mere comfort, the slavery of happiness. This is the game. And the woman, in the Nietzschean vision, is the master of this game. She is not playing to lose. She is playing to win, to shape, to control the raw, chaotic energy of the masculine child. This is where Nietzsche launches his most devastating critique, not of woman, but of the institution designed to domesticate this dangerous game, marriage. He sees modern marriage not as a sacred union, but as a folly of two, a mutual arrangement for mediocrity. In Zarathustra's On Child and Marriage, he does not attack love. He attacks the corruption of love into something safe, sentimental, and life-denying. "I have a question for you alone, my brother," Zarathustra proclaims. "I throw this question at your soul to see how deep it is." The question is about the purpose of marriage. Is it for companionship, for happiness, for mutual degradation into a comfortable slavery? No. For Nietzsche, the only justification for marriage, the only one worthy of a higher man, is as a creative act. You should build over and beyond yourself, but first, you must be built yourself, rectangular in body and soul. You shall not only reproduce, but produce higher. May the garden of marriage help you in that. Marriage, then, is not for the weak. It is the ultimate test of the whip. It is the discipline of using the intense, dangerous, and creative energy between man and woman to build something beyond themselves. A child, yes, but more importantly, a higher state of being for both. Most marriages fail this test. They become a twosome for the sake of the twosome, a mutual conspiracy against the world, a shared cowardice. The woman's role in this corrupted marriage is to tame the man, to file down his edges, to make him a good citizen, a reliable provider. And the man, having forgotten his whip, acquiesces. His creative fire is extinguished for the cold comfort of a warm meal and predictable sex. This is the true betrayal, and Nietzsche holds both parties in contempt for it. But beyond the critique lies the terrifying positive vision, the concept of the warrior's wife, or the woman as creator. This is the woman who understands the game at its highest level. She does not want a tame man. She wants a worthy opponent, a partner in the dance of wills. Her love is not pity, not the desire to comfort, but the desire to challenge. She uses her own form of power, not the brute force of the man, but a power that is subtle, intuitive, and rooted in the deepest currents of life itself, to test his resolve, to force him to become harder, clearer, more focused. She is the anvil upon which his hammer strikes. In this dynamic, the whip is met with her own secret weapons, not with submission, but with a higher form of seduction that demands greatness as its price. This is the eternal feminine, not as a passive ideal, but as an active, drawing, completing force. It draws the man not downward into the abyss of weakness, but upward toward the overman. It is a force that says, if you are to have me, you must be worthy of me. And to be worthy of me, you must become more than you are. This is the hidden, redemptive message in Zarathustra's terrifying poetry. The feminine is the final and most dangerous initiation a man must face on his path to self-overcoming. It is the siren's call that can shipwreck him on the shores of mediocrity, or the wind that can fill his sails to cross uncharted oceans. The choice, ultimately, lies with the man and his remembrance of the whip, the symbol of his unbroken, unbreakable will to power. This is not a philosophy for a comfortable age. It is a philosophy for titans. Now we arrive at the most politically explosive dimension of Nietzsche's forbidden wisdom, his direct, unflinching, and prophetic confrontation with the nascent feminist movement of his time. To analyze this is to handle philosophical dynamite, for we are no longer dealing with private letters or abstract archetypes, but with a systematic philosophical assault on one of the most powerful social currents of the modern age. We must be clear, Nietzsche was not arguing against the women of the 19th century. He was diagnosing a psychological and spiritual sickness he saw in them, and more terrifyingly, the even greater sickness in the men who enabled it. He was not a critic of female power, but of the kind of power being sought, a power born not from strength, but from resentment, a will to power that had turned toxic, life-denying, and ultimately a pathway to the collective degeneration of both sexes. The context is crucial. The late 19th century saw the first organized waves of feminist thought, demanding access to university education, professions, and political rights. The mainstream, liberal narrative, then as now, portrayed this as a pure and noble struggle for justice and equality. Nietzsche, with his preternatural ability to smell the underlying psychological motives, perceived something entirely different. He saw not a quest for a higher, more potent form of existence, but a revolt of the weak. In his notes and in passages scattered throughout his works, he identifies feminism not as an extension of the will to power, but as its perversion, a manifestation of what he called slave morality applied to the battle of the sexes. His core argument was this: the modern feminist does not truly desire to become stronger, more formidable, or more responsible. She desires to diminish the man. Her struggle is not for her own ascent, but for his descent. It is a politics of resentment, ressentiment par excellence. The true sovereign woman, the one who possesses a natural instinctive power over men, a power rooted in mystery, in psychological depth, in the terrifying and beautiful forces of life itself, does not need to demand rights from a committee. She takes what she wants through the sheer force of her presence. The feminist, in Nietzsche's view, is the opposite. She is the woman who has failed at this deeper, more ancient game. She's been unable to captivate, to inspire, to command through her feminine potency. And so, filled with bitterness and a sense of inferiority, she turns to the state, to the mob, to the abstract concepts of equality and rights, to legislate what she could not win on the battlefield of natural psychology. She exchanges the subtle, intoxicating power of the feminine for the blunt, bureaucratic power of the clerk. This is not progress, it is a catastrophic trade, a Faustian bargain, where she gains entry into the man's world at the cost of her own soul. Nietzsche saw this movement as fundamentally unfeminine. In his essay, The Greek Woman, he had long admired the classical ideal where the radical difference between the sexes was a source of creative tension and cultural vitality. The feminist project of making the sexes equal, which to him meant the same, was a war against nature itself. He wrote that when a woman engages in scholarship, something in her psyche must harden, something must be lost. It is not that women are incapable of intellect, it is that the specific, modern, masculine form of abstract, dispassionate reasoning is a violation of their deeper, more intuitive and life-affirming nature. By adopting the tools and values of the masculine world, the feminist inadvertently castrates herself spiritually. She becomes a mimic, a copy of a man, but a poor copy lacking the native instincts for that mode of being, and having abandoned the power that was uniquely her own. This is the great tragedy Nietzsche foresaw, not the liberation of woman, but her self-mutilation in the name of a shallow utilitarian ideal. But his most scathing critique was reserved for the men of this new age, the modern men who allowed this to happen. The rise of feminism, for Nietzsche, was not the fault of women. It was the ultimate symptom of male weakness. It was the failure of men to be men. A society with strong, sovereign, purpose-driven men would never produce a feminist movement because such men would be utterly immune to its demands. They would not find the nagging, resentful woman attractive. They would find her pathetic. They would not legislate in her favor. They would dismiss her. The feminist is, in a dark sense, created by the weak, passive, approval-seeking modern male who has lost his instinct for command and his taste for danger. He is so desperate for female approval, so terrified of being called sexist, so devoid of his own mission, that he willingly hands over the keys to the kingdom. He agrees to the castration of his own spirit in exchange for a pat on the head. Nietzsche saw this dynamic as the true death knell of European culture, a conspiratorial pact between the resentful woman and the emasculated man to dismantle the very structures of greatness and replace them with the comfortable, flat, and sterile world of the last man. This is why his warnings are more relevant today than ever. He predicted the logical conclusion of this path, not a utopia of equality, but a cold, disenchanted world where the thrilling, dangerous, and creative tension between man and woman is replaced by a bland negotiation between interchangeable individuals. He foresaw the erosion of love, which for him was always a form of combat and fascination between two fundamentally different natures, and its replacement with partnerships and contracts. He predicted the psychological confusion, the epidemic of loneliness, the collapse of birth rates, all symptoms of a civilization that has declared war on its own biological and spiritual foundations. The modern man, scrolling through dating apps, terrified of saying the wrong thing, and the modern woman, exhausted by the burden of being a pseudo-man while simultaneously yearning for a strength she is told to despise, both are living out the precise nightmare Nietzsche prophesied. They are the children of the rebellion he warned against, lost in a world that offered them everything except the one thing that makes life worth living, the chance to become, through struggle and attraction to the dangerous other, something greater than they are. We have now reached the crucible where Nietzsche's philosophy becomes a practical psychology, a ruthless dissection of the romantic battlefield. If his critiques of feminism were a diagnosis of societal illness, then his insights into love and attraction are the field manual for navigating the resulting psychological terrain. Forget everything you've been taught about romance, companionship, and healthy relationships. Nietzsche compels us to see the raw, unfiltered truth that the realm of Eros is not a sanctuary of peace, but the most intense and sophisticated theater of the will to power. To speak of love without acknowledging this fundamental reality is to build a house on a foundation of lies. Here, in the intimate space between two people, the most profound struggles for dominance, validation, and psychological survival are waged. Nietzsche systematically deconstructs the modern mythology of love to reveal the primal forces operating beneath its sentimental veneer. What society calls falling in love is, from this perspective, often a form of voluntary slavery, a hypnotic state where an individual surrenders their sovereignty to the image of another. He saw this not as a beautiful surrender, but as a dangerous pathology of the weak, a desperate attempt to lose oneself in another, because one cannot bear the burden of oneself. The strong individual does not fall in love. They step into it consciously, with their eyes wide open as one steps into a familiar and demanding game. For them, love is not a loss of self, but a sharpening of it. It is the ultimate test, the anvil upon which their will is hardened. In this dynamic, every gesture, every word, every moment of intimacy or withdrawal becomes a move in a complex psychological chess match. The question is not, do they love me? But what is the balance of power here? Am I enhancing my strength in this exchange, or am I dissipating it? Is this dynamic forcing me to grow, or is it lulling me to sleep? This brings us to the Nietzschean concept of the two types of love, a dichotomy that shatters the modern romantic ideal. On one hand, there's what we can call pity love, Mitleid. This is the love of the weak and the shepherd. It is the desire to coddle, to comfort, to reduce tension, and to ultimately diminish the other person to a manageable, non-threatening size. This is the love that says, I will make you happy, by which it means, I will make you comfortable and weak, so you will never leave me. It is the love that fears the greatness in the other, because that greatness represents a threat of abandonment or a demand for self-improvement. This pity love is the foundation of most modern relationships, a mutual suicide pact disguised as compassion. It is the psychological glue that holds together the union of the last men. In stark opposition stands danger love. This is the love of the strong, the creator, the warrior. This love does not seek to comfort, but to challenge. It is drawn not to the weaknesses of the other, but to their strengths, their potential, their hidden demons and highest possibilities. A man in the grip of danger love does not seek a woman who will soothe his anxieties. He seeks one whose very presence intensifies his anxieties, forcing him to overcome them and become more than he is. A woman embodying this principle does not desire a man she can control. She desires a force of nature she can engage with, a worthy opponent who demands the very best of her own formidable spirit. This love is a storm, a dance on the edge of an abyss. It is terrifying, unstable, and ecstatic. It is not for everyone. It is only for those with the courage to stare into the chaos of another human soul and see not a threat, but a catalyst for their own transformation. The ultimate goal of danger love is not mutual comfort, but mutual overcoming. Understanding this framework allows us to decode the hidden language of attraction. Why does playing hard to get work on a fundamental level? Not as a manipulative trick, but because it signals a life independent of the other's validation, a manifestation of inner strength and sovereignty. It is a non-verbal declaration. My world does not revolve around you. I have my own mission, my own power. To have me, you must be worthy of entering my orbit. Conversely, desperation and neediness are the ultimate repellents because they broadcast a vacuum of power, a soul that seeks not a partner in the dance, but a crutch for its own inability to stand. Nietzsche's most devastating psychological insight, however, concerns the relationship between passion and self-destruction. He understood that the most intense attractions are often to those who are dangerous to us, who reflect back to us the parts of ourselves we have repressed or fear. The man who has domesticated his own wildness will be irresistibly drawn to a woman who embodies it, for she represents his lost self. But this attraction is a double-edged sword. If he is not strong enough, her very wildness will destroy him, as he will try to possess and tame it, only to be broken in the process. This is the essence of the tragic love affair. The passion is not a flaw. It is a symptom of a deeper psychological incompletion, seeking its resolution through another. The sovereign individual enters such a passion not to be completed, but to be tested and refined by its fire. The practical application for the modern man is therefore not to avoid passion, but to enter it with a new consciousness. He must learn to see every interaction, every rejection, every moment of intimacy as feedback on his own psychological state. Is he acting from a place of strength and abundance, or from neediness and lack? Is he wielding his whip, his unshakable purpose, or has he laid it down in exchange for a moment of comfort? The battlefield of love is the most demanding school for self-mastery. It reveals a man's weaknesses with brutal honesty, his vanity, his fear, his thirst for approval. But for the one who can face these revelations without flinching, who can use them as fuel for his own transformation, this battlefield becomes the forge where an ordinary man is hammered into something harder, rarer, and infinitely more potent. He learns the final lesson, that the ultimate object of the game is not to win the other, but to win against the weaker version of himself that the other provokes. We have traversed the forbidden archives, deciphered the philosophical codes, and mapped the psychological battlefield. Now, we arrive at the ultimate purpose of this entire journey, the application of Nietzsche's dangerous wisdom as a practical toolkit for navigating the modern world. This is not an academic exercise. It is a survival manual for the soul in an age engineered to produce confusion, weakness, and dependency. The dating apps, the corporate feminism, the therapy speak, the entire architecture of modern relationships, these are the labyrinths where the minotaur of our own weakened will waits to devour us. Nietzsche provides the sword and the thread. The first and most critical skill is diagnostic perception. The modern world is a hall of mirrors, a cacophony of signals designed to obscure true motives. You must learn to see through the language of virtue to the underlying will to power. When you encounter a profile on a dating app, don't read the words, read the psychology behind them. The woman whose bio is a curated list of virtues, feminist, empath, healing, is often signaling a deep-seated resentment and a desire for moral superiority to mask insecurity. She is not declaring her strengths. She is advertising her wounds and demanding they be honored. Conversely, the woman who projects mystery, who uses minimal words or showcases a life of action and independence, is often operating from a place of genuine abundance. She doesn't need to tell you she is strong. Her presence implies it. This diagnostic lens must be applied to every interaction. Is her anger a righteous claim for justice, or is it the lashing out of the weak who cannot attain what they desire through natural strength? Is her vulnerability an authentic opening, or a strategic play for pity and control? Nietzsche teaches you to become a psychologist of the depths, to hear the silent music beneath the spoken words. From this perception flows the principle of sovereign communication. The modern man has been taught to seek approval, to negotiate for affection, to apologize for his presence. This is a recipe for psychic annihilation. Nietzschean communication is rooted in the unshakable assumption of your own value. This does not mean being a loud, domineering brute. It means your attention, your time, and your commitment are valuable currencies. You do not give them away freely. Your texts are not desperate bids for validation. They are deliberate, concise statements of intent or inquiry. You do not seek to charm everyone. You seek to be understood by the few who are capable of understanding you. You master the power of silence, understanding that what you do not say often carries more weight than what you do. In a world of constant anxious chatter, the man who is comfortable with silence projects a depth that is both intimidating and magnetic. He does not explain himself to those who are not entitled to an explanation. He acts, and his actions are his argument. This leads to the core of practical self-preservation, energetic hygiene. Your will to power is your most precious resource. It is your life force, your creativity, your capacity for joy and mastery. Most relationships, especially in the modern context, are not exchanges of energy. They are vampiric drains. You must learn to identify the psychological vampires, the perpetually offended, the professional victims, those who speak only of their trauma and their needs. These individuals are black holes of vital energy. Their entire mode of being is to suck the strength from others to compensate for their own inner void. The Nietzschean response is not hatred, but a disciplined surgical avoidance. You do not try to save them. You recognize that their salvation is not your responsibility, and that attempting it will only lead to your own drowning. You curate your social and romantic environment with the ruthlessness of a gardener weeding a precious plot of land. You ask one question of every person you let into your inner circle. Does this person elevate my energy, clarify my mind, and strengthen my resolve? Or do they leave me feeling depleted, confused, and weaker? There is no middle ground. Tolerance for energy vampires is the luxury of the already defeated. Finally, we arrive at the ultimate goal, the alchemy of solitude. The herd fears being alone above all else. For them, solitude is a punishment, a vacuum to be filled with noise, distraction, and the shallow validation of others. For the Nietzschean individual, solitude is the forge. It is in the profound, willed isolation from the crowd that you undertake the greatest project of your life, the creation of yourself. This is where you transmute the pain of rejection, the sting of betrayal, the confusion of the battlefield into a higher consciousness. You do not seek a relationship to complete you. You build a self so whole, so potent, so rich in internal purpose that a relationship becomes a choice, not a need. You become a sun that radiates its own light rather than a moon begging for reflection. This is the final, terrifyingly simple warning and promise that Nietzsche offers. The modern world is a system designed to make you forget your whip, to make you soft, agreeable, and manageable. It uses the language of love, equality, and compassion to convince you to lay down your arms. Do not be deceived. The game is still being played. The will to power still operates, whether you acknowledge it or not. The choice is not whether to play, but how. You can play unconsciously, as a pawn, and wonder why you feel used, drained, and disrespected. Or you can pick up the whip of self-mastery, sharpen your diagnostic perception, practice sovereign communication, maintain ruthless energetic hygiene, and retreat into the creative power of your solitude. Then, and only then, will you stop being a victim of the labyrinth. You will become its master. And you will find that the very dangers that once destroyed you have become the forces that propel you toward a life of unparalleled strength and vitality. This is the forbidden fruit of Nietzsche's knowledge. It is bitter to the taste, but it grants not death, but a more intense, more formidable, and truly authentic life.